Hello, everybody. It's Alex Ihama, the president of International School of Greatness and the Corporate University here in Toronto, Canada. On May 25th, as we all know, all over the world, this is known on May 25th, a white police officer placed his knee on the neck of George Floyd, a black American in Minneapolis. And strangled him right until on camera. And of course, it sparked a protest, which is still going on even at the time of recording this video in July, longest standing protest in recent times. And that has sparked a lot of conversation about racism, a lot of conversation about Black Lives Matters, and so many other conversations. And of course, some people are leveraging the momentum to perpetuate other kind of agenda. But out of all this, the most important topic, I think, one of the most important topic that has bubbled to the top is the topic or the issue of systemic racism. Systemic racism. A lot of people don't know what it is. A lot of people have no idea. In fact, here in Toronto and all over the US and all over the world, even in the United Kingdom, politicians are put in the spot, people in positions of authority are placed and asked the question to explain, and they couldn't. In fact, here in Canada, the head of the RCMP, with all due respect to her, could not explain what systemic racism is, while others denied flatly that it even existed. So in this short video, I want to help people understand what this is about from different perspective. One from somebody who experienced it almost all the time. For what I do, I travel around the world and I do a lot of speaking engagement. I've had the opportunity to work with and for governments. I met prime ministers and presidents all over the world. So presidents and CEOs of major organizations. I'm an executive coach, professional speaker. We've been involved in the execution of over $1 billion worth of projects and programs. And, I have written books and have over 100 transformational programs on leadership and strategic management and all that. Why do I say that? I have the experience, I have the exposure and the education in leadership and in topics that are related to this. And yet, when I have these conversations with my executive clients and I tell them, they are amazed that despite all that, it's still an issue that I'm faced with even personally. But this is not about me. This is about corporate America. This is about corporate Canada. This is about corporate United Kingdom, if you will. This is about corporations who frankly are stepping up to say, okay, we want to understand this concept and we want to deal with it. So there's no political agenda in this at all. It's something everybody's faced with, but only few people understand. When you go in the dictionary, I mean, you can Google it right away and read how systemic racism is defined. It's very vague. I'm reading it right off the internet. It says is a form of racism that is embedded in normal practice within society or an organization. That's vague. When you say is a form of racism, you're correct. That is embedded, you're correct. As a normal practice, you're correct. In society or an organization. But this really is why they are struggling. It's really why the Prime Minister of Canada couldn't explain it himself. It's really why the RCMP, head of RCMP couldn't. It's really why the politicians are struggling with it. And it's really why the organizations don't even know what to do in the first place. So what is systemic racism? In simple words, this is our definition here at the Corporate University. Systemic racism is a series of undocumented policies, processes, and procedures to systematically hinder the personal, professional, and socio-economic development of a particular group of people simply because of their ethnicity. I'll say that again. This is a series. It's not one, is a series of undocumented processes, policies, and procedures to systematically hinder, suppress, object, obstruct the personal, professional, and socio-economic development of a particular group of people, because simply, underline the word simply, because of their ethnicity. Simply because of their ethnicity. So when you go into organizations, they have processes, or into government, they have processes and procedures and policies. Those are documented, right? And people are supposed to follow that. But as we all know, there's always how things are done around here. That's what we're talking about. They are not documented, but it's just how things are done. Let me give you a quick story, which I wrote in my book, Welcome to Greatness. Wrote it way before this, right? And I was explaining how I spoke in a major organization, major organization, one of the top is for certainly 40, 50, if you will, organization. They are branching in Canada, and I spoke at that event, and we were talking about inconvenient truth and things about how you grew up, how your personal upbringing affects your professional excellence. So, and it wasn't even like focused on racism per se, but the story I was sharing was about a woman who came up to me after that speech, and literally in tears, and she was saying that when I was speaking, I did say that there were things that happened to you, things that were said to you, things that happened to you, or things you experienced, and how they shape your perception over time. She said when she was a kid, say 8 to 10 years old, she had a very good friend. She's a white little girl, had a little black friend. They were even up to the age of having any kind of serious relationship, but they were just friends. They were kids, right? And the parents and uncle noticed that she's always playing with this black kid, and they warned her. They warned her that she should not play with black people, because those black people are dangerous. This is true story. She told me. I still have her name, business card, and all, but I protected that, of course, when I wrote the story in the book. And she said that over time, imagine for the next 25 to 30 years, she hated black people. She ran away from them. She didn't want to encounter them. She avoided them. And as the saying goes, what you seek, you find. As you just said, seek and you shall find. So she's always attracted to news events or activities where perhaps a black person has been arrested for a crime, or things are happening, which of course crime doesn't have race, right? White people commit crimes, black people commit crimes, Indian people commit crimes, right? So, but she was always attracted to those kind of stories to reinforce what was the hate that was imbibed in her as a kid, right? And she was in tears telling me this, and she said only recently she started to realize that there are truly some fine black people in the world. Really? Right? There are truly some fine black people in the world, and she's been working through this, and she needed me as a coach to help her out. What was interesting was when she gave me her business card and I looked at it, it said HR executive. So she was the HR executive for that company. Imagine that for 30 years she was building a career. She had in her mind that black people were incompetent, black people were insignificant, black people were notorious, black people were ... And yes, she's the head of HR. Now you can imagine how many black people, or let me put it this way, how much loss to the organization, because they would have not had access to the best of the black people who may have come to apply for a job in our place. So here is this fine woman who is the head of HR with this mindset, and you can tell how that would have affected the hiring of Black people in that organization. So it's not documented and say, don't hire Black people. But because of a mindset that she had developed over time, that built, that resulted to systemic racism in that company. A lot of people don't know this. So systemic racism, when you say, oh, wait, there's no systemic racism in my company, perhaps you haven't examined yourself enough, and certainly you have not done a thorough investigation. This is what we do. Organizations are bringing us in now to have dialogue. Organizations, major organizations, government are bringing us in now to have dialogue with the executives on how they can deal with systemic racism. Here are a couple of facts you must understand about systemic racism. I'm going to give you 5 fundamental facts about systemic racism. Number 1, systemic racism is subtle. Is subtle as opposed to blatant. So racism, so when you saw that police officer, God touched his heart, the white police officer who pressed his neck, his knee on George Floyd's neck, that's blatant. It was clear. Now, reports are just out. You can read them. I just read them this morning. BBC has it, CNN have it. They all have it. The transcript that George, for 20 times he said, I can't breathe. 20 times he said, I can't breathe. 20 times he said. In fact, one of the responses from the white officer was, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a heck lot of energy to even say that. So certainly you can. Really? Like, we don't want to get into the mechanics of the case, but that is a blatant racism. Now, what is systemic racism is, George Floyd is not the only one that has been killed by police officers. In fact, another one was killed just after that, right? So, the list, I have a list of them. I Googled them, list of people that have been shot, and most of them were recorded on camera, and yet there was no conviction. That is systemic racism. The fact that there was no conviction, that is systemic racism. The act in itself is blatant racism. So I'm saying that so you see the difference. So systemic racism has a way of arriving at the same conclusion that is void of justice, at the same conclusion that is void of righteousness. Same conclusion, right? So I hope, and we're all praying this is different, because if you don't find him guilty in the eyes of the law, systemic racism again has prevailed, which we hope not. Certainly we hope not. So fact number 1, systemic racism is subtle as opposed to blatant racism. It's like a virus that can exist without you even knowing. I was speaking to my sister this morning. She's in the United Kingdom and she's a doctor, and we're talking about, and she said she dropped her kids in school. I'm like, really? They go to school now? I say, yes. They test their temperature and this and that and that, and they go to school. And we both agree that, and she said it, that, the coronavirus can be in you and you won't even know about it. So that is like systemic racism. So it's kind of interesting. We are fighting against coronavirus and at the same time against systemic racism. Same. They literally they operate in the same way. So that's our number 2. My friends, systemic racism exists everywhere in the world. People are like, really? Even in Africa? Yes, it does. yes, it exists among the Black people, among the Indian people, among the white people. Like, I lived in Europe for a long time, and I know Europe very well. The East and the West, there's systemic racism against them. In the United Kingdom, my friend, there are people racist against people from Poland. They're both white. At least so one of us who are from Africa, we're like, really? Yeah, so it exists. Systemic racism, yes, it's got to do with the ethnicity, but you can say it's colorblind. Literally exists. So systemic racism, number 2, fact number 2, fundamental fact number 2, it exists everywhere in the world. In corporation, it exists in every big bank. It like literally, if you say it doesn't exist, then you don't know what it is. That's the truth. Except you can tell me you've gone to the hearts of everybody in your organization to know how they think, how they talk, and how they act when you're not there. Right? So it exists everywhere. It's innate. It's innate. As I gave you the example of that fine woman, here's the source of racism. A lot of people don't know. So racism does not, well, it does not, it's not genetics at all, right? You know, racism is not genetics. Racism is learned. Racism is learned based on what you have been through, you have been told, or you have seen or felt. That is really what it is. So if we, you know, there was I was listening to a video by a great speaker, and he was referencing how in their church there was a former a Ku Klux Klan, KKK, the son of a former KKK. So generational, 3 generations of KKK, and one of them has repented, became a Christian, goes to this church, and he said that, and they asked him, like, how come you're, like, how did you become a KKK? And he said, well, my father was. And I said, okay, how did he become? He said, well, his father was. So it was passed down. It's learned. It's learned, right? So he repented. He had a change of heart, and he's now an advocate for social justice for Black people, and he's white. So you cannot learn this. It's everywhere. So number 2 is everywhere. Number 3 is created by the collective mindset of a common group of people in positions of authority. It's a collective, it's created by collective mindset of a common group of people in positions of authority. So they don't, in some cases, they don't sit down, like, of course, in the KKKs and all that, they do sit down and discuss it. But in some cases, let's say in a bank, for instance, or in an insurance company, or in a manufacturing company, the leaders, in most cases, do not sit down and say, well, we don't want Black people to rise to executive level in this bank. We don't want no Black people at senior executive level. They may not sit down to do that, but they share the view in their mind. So when there are 2 options, they'll prefer one. And I'll give you a personal one. There's an opportunity that I was approached by a few years ago in Toronto here, downtown Toronto, Bay Street, Toronto, like, like you have your Wall Street and things. So I went, then twice they wanted me to come back to discuss, the content of the program. And, then they wanted me to come back again. So I now follow up. So one of the executives in that bank is a friend of mine. We have a relationship, a white, fine young man. We both love each other, great guy. We met at Starbucks, and he was mentioning his words, and he says, Alex, there's really, chances are you're not going to get this opportunity. I'm like, why? And he said, well, let me just, your friends, let me be clear with you. He says, everybody on that executive team is, here's how he put it. He says, they are a bunch of old white folks with Harvard degrees, and they're already wondering what a Black young kid like you is gonna teach them. Maybe they should be listening to this. No, like, I'm not talking 1929. No, I'm not talking 1965. I'm talking 2019. This happened, right? Literally is what he told me. He says, I'm part of them. But I'm trying to, I know you are going to do a fantastic job. I know your contents are deep. I know you are very strategic in how you position information. And I know, he said, but you're Black. Right, so of course I have outgrown that. I'm held back by nothing. I believe that yes, certainly they all exist. So anyway, it's created by the collective mindset of a common group of people in positions of authority. Number four, it is the outcome when organizations, listen to this, are not intentional enough about identifying and conquering it. So these people come into your organizations with racist mindset they haven't dealt with, and they begin to foster systemic racism in your organization. Now, if you are the CEO of an organization, if you have any position of authority in your organization, and you are not aware, and you don't make intentional effort to identify and neutralize it, then you're part of the problem, and certainly will flourish in your organization. Right? If people need to understand that the systemic racism, yes, it's against, a particular ethnicity, let's say in the Black people in this situation, but you are losing as well because you are losing access. There's almost that they said, go do your research, almost $1 trillion in spending by people who've identified as African descent in North America. $1 trillion access, right? The pool of intelligence, the pool of innovation, right? So it is the outcome. If an organization, and I implore you, and I hope if you're watching this today, if you've started watching this video and you're still watching it and you're in a position of authority, this is what you want to take serious. Consult us. Send me an email, alex@alexihama.com. Find me on LinkedIn, social media, wherever, and we'll have a complimentary conversation. Our goal is to bring awareness. That's our goal. Reach out so we can begin to have this conversation. And fifthly, my friend, it can only, underline the word only, be eliminated by the systematic intervention of those in positions of authority. It can only be eliminated by a systematic intervention of those in positions of authority. Just like I said in number one, it is subtle, right? It is subtle. And number two, it's everywhere. Number three is created by collective of mindset, especially of those people in positions of authority. Then number four is an outcome when organizations are not intentional enough. And number five, it can only be eliminated by people in positions of authority. So, so yes, if you want to do something about this, then certainly we need to have that conversation at the top. We have a program. We've been doing diversity program for 23 years. I personally been involved in the diversity work in some of the big banks here in Toronto, some of the big organizations, and certainly around the world. A lot of people don't know this. Yes, Toronto is the most diverse place. Jamaica, for instance, is very diverse. In their parliament, they have white people, they have Indian people, they have black people. Like in Africa too, in Uganda, they have white people, black people. So people don't notice. You think Africa is black? Yes, predominantly, but there are a lot of white folks who identify as Africans in South Africa and in places. So this systemic racism, this topic of diversity is everywhere. We have developed a program. It's called the Diversity Leadership. We have developed a diversity leadership framework we would love to share with you. In our diversity leadership framework, it focuses on different areas of diversity, but to bring this to systemic racism against Black people, there's a particular series of workshops which we call How to Integrate Black Heritage in a White Culture, right? How to integrate Black heritage in a white culture. We facilitate the conversation with tact and diplomacy. We use stories to elicit the opinions of people in your organizations and begin to weave diversity into leadership capability. I wrote a book on this, by the way. You can find it. It's the Mystique of Leadership. So, and part of it is talking about this. So components of the program is we introduce you to our concept of diversity leadership, and then we talk about how to celebrate differences between culture in a corporate environment. And thirdly, we introduce you to the framework for a multicultural corporation. What is the framework? What does it look like? The diversity framework, and then the impact of Black heritage to the bottom line. That'll be an interesting one, especially for the CFOs and those who are money conscious, right? So what's the impact of the Black heritage to the bottom line? And then fifthly, as a part of the program outline, how to bridge gaps in diversity leadership, how to bridge gap in diversity leadership. Listen, in my book, The Mystique of Leadership, I define leadership as a spirit that can only be ignited by purpose, sustained by passion, and guided by principle. Sustained by passion and guided by principle. That's the definition of leadership. Now, diversity leadership, on the other hand, I said diversity leadership is the corporate awareness of subtle systemic discrimination within an organization and the intentional and unwavering determination to create and sustain a culture that remarkably celebrates gender, racial, religious, and other forms of natural and social differences. Again, it's Alex Ihama, And I invite you to having this conversation. We'll be glad to facilitate it for your organization. As I said, send us a message, alex@alexyama.com. Find us on social media on LinkedIn, and we can take it off from there. Just to give you a preview of the outline, there's a module for a general module for employees and executives and everybody in the organization, where we'll be sharing, inspiring the employees and executives to humbly identify and to rise above subtle prejudicial tendencies to create a corporate culture of unity, cohesiveness, harmony, and certainly diversity. Leadership will be looking, offering an in-depth look at the sensitive topics of race and race relations, characteristics of ethnicity, life as a minority, roots of racism, systemic racism, white privileges, and the glass ceiling, right? So when people hear white privileges, sometimes they're like a little uncomfortable and things, but an example for you, which you can also Google, was recently, just last week or so, 2 weeks ago, a white woman who's Canadian, lives in New York, was walking in Central Park with her dog, not on a leash. So a black man says, who was coming, says, please, do you mind putting your dog on a leash? And she took offense at that. And literally, she was being recorded. I'm going to call the police and I'm going to tell them an African American is threatening my life. Really? All he said was put your leash on a dog, put your dog on a leash. Come on, right? So that is why privileges at play. And if we were not going through this pandemic of systemic racism, I guarantee you she would have made that call. The cops will come, arrest the fine young man, try to find something wrong with him, some ticket he hasn't paid that may lead to him being shot. But because of what's going on, the police are becoming wiser in that regards, and I understand the young woman has been charged. I would love to hear what she's been charged with. If she's been charged with not putting the dog on a leash and pay $50, that again is systemic racism playing out, because that should not be a $50 fine. But I'll leave that to the justice system. Will help to facilitate uncomfortable conversations with employees and executives about challenges and the challenges that ethnic minorities face in your workplace and communities, especially those with African heritage. We'll also empower and equip the ethnic minorities in your organizations with tips, tools, and techniques to educate and collaborate with their peers on cultural differences and how to build synergy. What we're basically saying here is both the black people in your workplace, the ethnic minorities in your workplace, they need help. They need to be trained as well on how to cope with systemic racism that you likely don't even know exists in your company anyway. Right? So while we are training the whole organization to be aware of systemic racism, on how to deal with it, we're also helping the minorities on how to cope with it and how to bring it to light and how to have a more conducive conversation with their peers. Critical. If you are going to bring two people together from two different ethnicity, two different culture, races, religion, you need to train them on how to interact. These things you don't write in HR policies. You train them. You have a conversation. And finally, we'll be sharing tips, tools, and techniques and corporate strategies to discover, discuss, and deal with subtle prejudice and systemic racism to protect the dignity of minorities and foster diversity leadership in your organization. Listen, there are a lot more I could share with you. Systemic racism is everywhere, and this is there's no better time to talk and deal with it than now. Just so you are aware, the United Nations, most people don't know this, by the way, the United Nations, they understand what is going on. And in 2015, they made a declaration. The declaration was 2015 to 2024 is the International Decade for People of African Descent. International Decade for People with of African Descent. And I'm going to close by reading their declaration. Literally word for word, I took off the United Nations website. Around 200 million people, they say, identify themselves as being of African descent, live in Americas. Millions more live in other parts of the world outside the African continent. Whether as descendants of the victims of the transatlantic slave trade or as more recent migrants, they constitute, listen to this, some of the poorest and most marginalized groups. Studies and findings by international and national bodies demonstrate that people of African descent still have limited access to quality education, health services, housing, and social security. In many cases, they say, their situations remains largely invisible, and insufficient recognition and respect have been given to the efforts of people of African descent to seek redress for their present condition. They all too often experience discrimination in their access to justice and face alarming high rates of police violence together with racial profiling. Listen, if you want to step up and be the leader that you've been called to be, if you want your organization to foster diversity leadership, if you are willing to participate in a conversation that will bring about the healing that the society, companies, and certainly nations so desperately need, reach out to us. Again, it's alex@alexyama.com, or visit thecorporateuniversity.ca. Find me on social media, find me on LinkedIn. Let's start the conversation. It is time we come together to bring end to systemic racism. I'll leave you with a quotation by Martin Luther King. It says, until a man can rise above his individualistic concern to a broader concern of humanity, he is not fit to live. Silence is no longer an option. It's time we come together and do something about it. It's time we come together and end systemic racism. Ms. Alex Ihama, thank you. God bless. Share this video certainly, and thank you for watching it. And I hope to talk to you soon.